The air in Scylla smelled of wealth, not just the obvious notes of sizzling galby and aged scotch, but the more subtle, pervasive sense of power, the crisp ozone of freshly pressed money, the faint, clean aroma of industrial-grade security, and the expensive, understated cologne that clung to the dark wood paneling like a promise. For Zola, standing perfectly still by the service station, it mostly smelled like survival. Her uniform, a starched white tunic over black trousers, was a deliberate marker of her class, a stark contrast to the silken opulence of the private dining room she was about to enter. Her hair was pulled back in a crown of intricate braids, a testament to hours of patient work. Her hands, though, told a truer story. They were capable, scarred with the small nicks and burns of 1,000 services, but steady, always steady. It was her eyes that held the secret. They were watchful, intelligent, cataloging the room not as a server, but as an analyst. She could feel the familiar weight settling in her chest, the cold calculus of her reality. $28,450, the cost of a single infusion for Leo. Her little brother, whose smile was the only sun in her world, was fighting a war in his own blood. And this restaurant, this gilded cage, was her armory. Every servile nod, every feigned smile, every swallowed insult was another bullet for that fight. This was not weakness, it was sacrifice. A flicker of movement by the main entrance drew her attention. One of the security men, a new face, tapped his earpiece, his brow furrowed in annoyance. A loose connection. A rookie mistake. In her old life, a life she kept buried under 6 feet of necessity, that detail would have been logged, analyzed, and filed. A vulnerability. Here, it was just another piece of data she was forced to ignore. She had been someone else once. A person who analyzed threats for a living, who spoke 3 dialects of Korean, who understood the subtle language of power spoken in rooms just like this. Now, she just poured the tea. Zola! The hiss came from Mr. Kim, the restaurant manager, his face pale and gleaming with sweat under the recessed lighting. He scurried towards her, his movements jerky, a puppet dancing on strings of anxiety. Chairman Park is on his way, VIP room 3, and Mr. Kwan's party is arriving for the main suite. He wrung his hands, his knuckles white. Perfect service. Do you understand? No mistakes. Tonight, there can be absolutely no mistakes. Zola inclined her head. Yes, Mr. Kim. The words were deferential, the tone placid. Inside, a cold knot tightened. Chairman Park was a sport humiliator, a man who derived pleasure from the public degradation of those he deemed beneath him. And Kwon Min-jun, he was something else entirely. Not just a VIP. He was the center of gravity around which this entire world spun. She saw him before she heard him. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was the first sign. Conversations didn't stop, but they lowered, the ambient hum dropping a full octave. The security details by the door stiffened, their casual stances snapping into rigid attention. It was the reaction of prey sensing a predator. Kwon Min-jun moved with a liquid deadliness, a panther in a bespoke suit so dark it seemed to absorb the light. He was flanked by 2 men, silent and monolithic, their presence an extension of his own will. He didn't walk through the restaurant. He consumed the space, the air parting before him. His body was a study in controlled force, the lines of his suit hinting at the disciplined muscle beneath. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch, its platinum face gleaming. Zola's mind did the math automatically. That watch could buy Leo 6 months, a year, if she stretched it. His hair was black, immaculate, and then his eyes found hers. For a fraction of a second, they rested on her. They were cold, calculating, devoid of emotion. They weren't seeing a woman, they were assessing an object, a piece of the furniture, and dismissing it in the same instant. He didn't break his stride, moving past her towards the main private suite without a word. The whisper of his passage left the air feeling thin and cold. Zola took a controlled breath, her mask of professional calm firmly in place. This was the hierarchy. She was the invisible floor upon which men like him walked. A few minutes later, Chairman Park Jin-woo made his entrance. Where Kwon Min-jun was a blade, Park was a bludgeon. He was loud, expansive, his voice booming through the restaurant as he greeted his associates, a coterie of sycophantic junior executives. He was performing, his every gesture calibrated for an audience. "Ah, the finest Galbian soul, I tell you," he roared, clapping one of his guests on the back hard enough to make the man stumble. "And the soju here, it could raise the dead." Mr. Kim practically bowed in half, his smile strained. "Chairman Park, an honor. Your usual room is ready." Park waved a dismissive hand, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Zola. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a cat that had found a mouse. "And you," he said, his voice dropping but carrying with theatrical weight. He gestured for her to lead the way. "Bring us the best of everything. Don't be slow." Zola bowed slightly. "Of course, sir." She led them to VIP Room 3, her back straight, her senses on high alert. The performance had begun. Inside the room, as she poured their water, Park began his routine. He spoke in Korean, his voice laced with casual contempt, fully confident that the foreign waitress was deaf to his meaning. "Look at this one," he said to his table, gesturing with his chin toward Zola. "They hire anyone these days. Can she even tell the difference between soy sauce and motor oil?" His guests chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between Park and Zola. "It's for the aesthetic, I suppose," another man chimed in, eager to please. "Exotic." Zola continued her work, her movements fluid and economical. She placed the small banchan dishes on the table, her face a neutral mask. Each word was a small, sharp stone thrown at her. She let them fall, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of a flinch. She had endured worse. For Leo, she could endure anything. The first course arrived, a bubbling, fragrant kimchi jjigae in a heavy earthenware bowl, its steam carrying the sharp, spicy scent of fermented cabbage and rich pork. Zola moved to place it in the center of the table. This was the moment. She saw the shift in Park's eyes, the tightening of his shoulders. It was calculated. As she leaned forward, he shifted his arm, knocking the heavy bowl. It tilted, a wave of scalding red broth cascading over the side, directly onto Zola's forearm. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up her arm. It was a searing, electric agony. The liquid felt thick as lava, clinging to her skin, stealing her breath. Her every instinct screamed to recoil, to cry out, to curse him. But she didn't move. She stood perfectly still as the world seemed to slow, the sounds of the room fading into a dull roar. The laughter at the table died. The clinking of chopsticks stopped. There was only the hiss of the hot liquid on her skin and the frantic, shallow sound of her own breathing. Park leaned back, a look of faux concern on his face. "Oh my," he said in English, his tone dripping with condescension. "Such a clumsy girl." He turned to his guests, and in Korean, his voice was laced with triumphant venom. "Did you see that? Like a startled animal. It probably doesn't even feel it." The room held its breath. Mr. Kim was frozen by the door, his face a mask of horror and impotence. The other diners pretended not to see, their gazes fixed firmly on their plates. They were all complicit in their silence. For 3 seconds, Zola said nothing. 3 seconds where the fire in her arm was eclipsed by a different kind of fire, an arctic flame of pure, controlled rage igniting in her soul. 3 seconds where she weighed a year of careful sacrifice against a single moment of unbearable indignity. 3 seconds where she made a decision. The waitress died in those 3 seconds. The analyst took her place. She slowly, deliberately, placed the now empty bowl on the table. She did not look at her arm, where a vicious red welt was already beginning to rise. Instead, she lifted her head and, for the first time, looked directly into Chairman Park Jin-woo's eyes. Her deferential mask was gone. The shift was so profound, so absolute. The shift was so profound, so absolute, that a gasp escaped one of the junior executives. The silence that followed was deathly. It was the silence of a predator realizing it has cornered the wrong prey. When Zola finally spoke, her voice was not loud, but it cut through the stillness like a shard of obsidian. The Korean that emerged was flawless, not the textbook language of a student, but the fluid, gravelly cadence of the Busan docks, laced with the unmistakable slang of the Jopek underworld. 수프를 쏟아서 힘을 과시하는 남자는 남자가 아니다. A man who spills soup to feel powerful is no man at all. The color drained from Park's face. His jaw went slack. the condescending smirk melting into a mask of disbelief. His associates stared, their chopsticks frozen halfway to their mouths. Zola took a small, deliberate step closer. Her voice dropped to a deadly quiet. Badaj goen ungdionggiol beniji. Just a puddle on the floor. She held his terrified gaze for a beat longer, then allowed her eyes to flick down to the spill on the polished floor. Josim haseo, bag hojangnim, she added, her tone as cold as steel. Badagi migarauniga. Be careful, Chairman Park. The floor is slippery. Park recoiled as if she had struck him. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, words failing him. He pointed a trembling finger at her. You... what? Who are you? Just a waitress, Zola replied, switching back to placid, unaccented English. The contrast was jarring, terrifying. With good ears, he finally found his voice, a frantic, blustering rage. Security! Get her out of here! Fire her! I'll have this place shut down! Mr. Kim started to move, propelled by pure fear, but a single raised hand from the doorway of the main suite stopped him cold. Kwon Min-jun stood there, flanked by his 2 sentinels. He hadn't moved from the spot, had clearly witnessed the entire exchange. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were fixed on Zola. For the first time, he was not looking at a piece of furniture. He was looking at an operator. He was looking at an equal. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was a verdict. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, not to Park, but to one of his own men. The man stepped forward, his movements economical. Chairman Park, the man's voice was polite, but carried the weight of an iron decree. Mr. Kwon suggests that your dinner has concluded. It was not a request. Park, his face a mottled patchwork of fury and fear, understood. To defy Kwon Min-jun here, in his territory, was unthinkable. He shoved his chair back, threw his napkin on the table, and stormed out, his entourage scrambling in his wake. He didn't look at Zola again. He couldn't. The room was left in a state of ringing silence. Zola stood her ground, the adrenaline a high-frequency hum beneath her skin, masking the throbbing agony in her arm. Min-jun's man turned to her. Mr. Kwon will see you now. Upstairs. Zola met the man's gaze, then looked past him to Min-jun, who still stood in the doorway watching her. There was no warmth in his expression, only a chilling, intense curiosity. This was not a rescue, it was a summons, a recognition. It was, in its own way, more dangerous than the scalding soup. Give me a moment, she said, her voice steady. She walked to the service station, retrieved a first aid kit, and began to coolly and efficiently treat the burn on her arm, her movements precise despite the pain. She was demonstrating control. She was demonstrating that she was not a victim to be pitied. When she was done, she wrapped a clean white bandage around her forearm, the stark white a mirror of her uniform, a battle scar. Then, and only then, did she turn and walk towards Kwon Min-jun, her head held high. The world had just shifted on its axis, and she was the one who had pushed it. The office upstairs was the antithesis of the opulent restaurant below. It was stark, minimalist, and brutally functional. One wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the glittering expanse of Seoul. The other walls were bare, save for a single piece of calligraphy that spoke of honor and consequence. The desk was a slab of polished black granite, empty except for a secure laptop and a single unadorned teacup. The air smelled of old paper, ozone, and power. Kwon Min-jun stood by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn when she entered. The silence stretched, a tactic she recognized. He was testing her, letting her stand in the center of his power, waiting for her to break. Zola remained still, her posture relaxed but ready, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She had been in rooms with far more dangerous men. She had been one of them. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the glass. Busan dialect and Jopak slang, an unusual skill set for a waitress. He turned to face her. In the cool light of the office, his features were sharper, more predatory. His eyes scanned her, not with the dismissive glance from before, but with the focused intensity of a master jeweler examining a rare, flawed diamond. My father was a fisherman from Haeundae, Zola said. The lie was smooth, practiced. A good cover story always had a kernel of truth. You pick things up. A flicker of something, not amusement, but something close to it, touched his eyes. Fishermen don't usually speak of honor prices among thieves, or know the internal security protocols for the Blue House. Zola didn't react, but a cold spike of alarm went through her. He had seen more than she'd realized. He wasn't just guessing. He knew. "You noticed the detail outside," he stated. It wasn't a question. "The one with the faulty earpiece. You clocked him the moment you saw him." She met his gaze, the game of pretending over. "It was a sloppy risk, a blind spot." "Park Jin-woo is a sloppy man," Min-jun countered, moving to his desk. He gestured to the chair opposite him. It was an invitation, but it felt like a command. "But he is a dangerous one. You made a powerful enemy tonight." Zola remained standing. "He was an enemy the moment I walked into that room. Tonight, I just made him aware of it." Min-jun's lips thinned into a line that might have been a smile on another man. On him, it was a concession. "You have courage, but courage without a shield is just another word for suicide. He will not let tonight's insult stand. He will come after you. He will find what you care about, and he will burn it to the ground." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Leo. Her mind flashed to her brother's face, his trusting eyes. The fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth, but she did not let it show. "What do you want, Mr. Kwan?" she asked, her voice level. "I want to know who you are." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the granite desk. Not the lies, not the cover story, the truth. This was the transaction, her identity for his protection. It was a trade, not a gift. She calculated the odds, the risks, the potential rewards. She had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "My name is Zola Amadi," she began, her voice taking on the clipped, precise cadence of a formal briefing. "Former Sergeant, United States Army, Intelligence Analyst, 75th Ranger Regiment. My specialization was East Asian transnational criminal organizations, specifically the network of shell corporations and trafficking routes controlled by men like Chairman Park." Min-jun's expression didn't change, but a new light entered his eyes, a light of profound understanding, recognition. He had found a weapon. "You left the service," he stated. "Honorable discharge, family matters." The words were clipped, hiding a world of pain, the diagnosis, the bills, the crushing weight that had forced her from a world of shadows and secrets into a world of starched uniforms and feigned humility. "Park Jin-woo," Min-jun said, the name a curse on his tongue. "My syndicate and his have been at a cold war for years. He hides behind his legitimate businesses, his political connections. He's a cancer. But to cut it out, I need proof. The kind of proof that can't be buried by money or threats." "You want his ledgers," Zola finished for him, "his supply chains, the names of his partners, the accounts where he hides the blood money." "I want to burn his empire to the ground," Min-jun confirmed, his voice deadly quiet, "and leave him standing in the ashes." Here it was, the offer. He would provide the resources, the infrastructure, the shield. She would provide the expertise, the intelligence, the plan. And in return, she asked, though she already knew the answer. He didn't offer her money directly. That would have been an insult. He was more clever than that. "I understand there is a new pediatric wing at Seoul National University Hospital. The facilities are state-of-the-art. Their experimental treatment programs have a remarkable success rate. I am one of their primary benefactors. A full sponsorship for a patient would be a simple matter." The breath caught in her throat. He wasn't just offering to pay the bills. He was offering Leo a future, a real one. Hope, so long a stranger, bloomed painfully in her chest. But she would not be a damsel. She would not be a charity case. This was a partnership. "I will get you what you need," she said, her voice hard as stone. "But we do this my way, my intelligence, my plan. You provide the support, the muscle, the access. But I run the operation. I am not your asset, Mr. Kwan. I am your strategist." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching. He was weighing her, judging her audacity. Any other man would have laughed her out of the room. Kwan Min-jun was not any other man. He saw the steel in her spine, the unyielding certainty in her eyes. He saw a fellow predator. He gave a single sharp nod. Agreed. He opened a drawer and produced a small, sleek burner phone and a black credit card with no name on it. He pushed them across the desk. A new apartment has been arranged. The address is on the phone. My head of security, Mr. Choi, will be your point of contact. You will have unlimited resources. Zola took the items. The cool plastic of the card felt heavy in her hand, the weight of a new and dangerous future. One more thing, she said, pausing at the door. He waited, his eyes questioning. My brother, she said, her voice softening for the first time. His name is Leo. He's 6. Minjun's expression remained impassive, but his gaze held hers. My men will ensure his protection. No one will touch him. I give you my word. Zola nodded, the unspoken pact sealing the air between them. She walked out of the office and down the stairs, back through the now quiet restaurant. She was no longer a waitress. She was a soldier going back to war. The burn on her arm was a dull throb, a constant reminder of the price of insult and the promise of a reckoning to come. She had been invisible. Now she was a ghost, and she was going hunting. The apartment was a sterile, high-tech sanctuary in the sky, its windows looking out over a city that had, until now, been a landscape of her oppression. Now it was a battlefield. Minjun's resources were, as promised, limitless. Within hours, the empty living room was transformed into an operations center. Encrypted servers, satellite network interfaces, and high-resolution monitors filled the space. A familiar arsenal from a life she thought she'd left behind. Zola worked with a feverish intensity, the muscle memory of her old job flooding back. She was no longer Zola the waitress, bowing and scraping for tips. She was Sergeant Amati, the analyst, the hunter of predators. The digital world was her hunting ground, and Chairman Park had left tracks everywhere. She started with his legitimate front, a luxury goods import-export company called Viridian Trade. Publicly, it was a model of corporate success. But Zola knew that every legitimate empire has a shadow, a hidden infrastructure where the real, dirty work gets done. Using a backdoor exploit she'd developed in the army, she slipped past Viridian's corporate firewalls like a phantom. What she found was rot, deep and pervasive. Shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, shipping manifests that didn't add up, with phantom cargo and ghost ships. And then, she found the heart of the darkness, a subsidiary listed as Global Hospitality Solutions. It purported to run an international internship program, bringing young women from Southeast Asia to Korea for training in the service industry. It was a lie. The contracts were traps, the wages a fiction. The women were trafficked, their passports seized, their lives sold to wealthy clients and seedy establishments across the country. Park wasn't just a corporate shark. He was a slaver. The cold fury Zola had felt in the restaurant solidified into something harder, heavier. This was no longer just about revenge for a personal insult. This was about justice for the voiceless. She compiled the data, tracing the money from the trafficking ring back to a series of encrypted accounts. But data wasn't enough. Minjun could crush Park's finances, but the man himself would slither away, protected by his political allies. She needed something irrefutable. Something personal. She needed to get inside. I need access to the Grand Imperial Hotel, she told Mr. Choi, Minjun's stoic head of security, over a secure line. It's Park's flagship. It's where he processes the new arrivals. Mr. Kwan can have a team inside within the hour, Choi's voice crackled back. No, Zola stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. No teams. They'll be looking for men in suits. They won't be looking for a new cleaner. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That is unnecessarily dangerous, Ms. Amati. The most dangerous position is the one they never suspect, she countered. Get me a uniform and a place on the night shift roster. I'm going in alone. This was her first test of the new dynamic, her first overruling of his established methods. Will be delivered in 30 minutes. Your will be delivered in 30 minutes. Your ID will name you Kim Soo-jin. Good luck. 2 nights later, Zola pushed a cleaning cart down the plush, silent corridor of the Grand Imperial's executive floor. The uniform was ill-fitting, the work demeaning, but it was the perfect camouflage. She was invisible again, but this time it was by design. Her target was Park's personal office. According to the intel, it contained a hardwired server, isolated from the network, where he kept his most sensitive files, the guest list. She moved with quiet efficiency, her senses alive. The smell of bleach and lemon polish, the soft whir of the air conditioning, the distant chime of an elevator. As she reached his office, she checked the hall. Empty. Using a micro camera to scope the lock mechanism, she bypassed the electronic keypad with a magnetic jammer and slipped inside. The office was a monument to narcissism. A massive portrait of Park hung on one wall. The desk was a slab of gaudy, gold-veined marble. She went to work, her fingers flying across the terminal of his private server. She had less than 5 minutes. But as the data began to transfer to a shielded thumb drive, she heard footsteps in the hall. Heavy, unhurried. A security patrol. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She killed the monitor and slid behind a heavy velvet curtain just as a keycard beeped in the lock. The door swung open. A large, thick-necked guard stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room. Zola held her breath, her body rigid. He was thorough, checking the windows, the desk. He was moving towards the curtains. He was 10 feet away. 5. He reached out a hand. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life. "Sector 4, status?" He grunted, annoyed by the interruption. He keyed his mic. "Sector 4 clear. Nothing to report." "Copy that. Proceed to Sector 5. The guard hesitated, his eyes lingering on the curtain for another second. Then, with a shrug, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Zola sagged against the wall, a sheen of cold sweat on her skin. The data transfer was complete. She slipped out of the office and melted back into the shadows of the hotel, the thumb drive a hot, secret weight in her pocket. The victory was short-lived. Park was sloppy, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the attack had come from Min Jun, and he knew somehow the waitress was involved. He couldn't touch her in her high-security fortress. So he went after the one thing she couldn't shield. The call came from Mrs. Cho, the elderly woman who looked after Leo while Zola worked. Her voice was thin with panic. "Zola, the police! They are here! They say they have a warrant. They are turning your apartment upside down." Ice flooded Zola's veins. It was a plant, drugs, a weapon, something to get her arrested, to take Leo away from her. "Keep him calm, Mrs. Cho. Don't let them talk to him. I'm on my way." She contacted Choi, her voice a low, dangerous command. "Park's men frame me. They're at my old apartment. Get a legal team there now. Interfere, delay them, and get Leo out." She watched on a traffic cam feed as Min Jun's men descended, a wave of black sedans and sharp-suited lawyers who engulfed the two bewildered police officers. They extracted Leo and Mrs. Cho with swift, silent efficiency. But the message was clear. The war was no longer confined to boardrooms and servers. Park had made it personal. He had threatened her son. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The final piece of the puzzle came from the drive she'd risked her life to get. It wasn't just a list of clients. It was a schedule. Park was planning to sell a new group of girls at a private, illegal auction, disguised as a charity gala for the upcoming succession of the powerful Kwan family patriarch, Min Jun's own grandfather. And on that schedule was another name, a sniper, contracted to eliminate the elder Kwan during the gala's opening speech, creating chaos that would allow Park to consolidate power amidst the ensuing turmoil in the syndicate. She looked at the architectural plans for the venue. Min Jun's security team had mapped the obvious sniper nests, the rooftops, the opposing windows. But they had missed something. A maintenance catwalk suspended over the main ballroom. It had a perfect unobstructed line of sight to the podium, a blind spot to the ground-level security. "He's not planning a frontal assault," she told Min Jun, pointing to the schematic spread across the table between them. They were in his office, the city lights a cold fire outside the window. "He's planning a decapitation strike. He's going to kill your grandfather." Min Jun's face was a mask of cold fury. "My men will sweep the catwalk." "No," Zola said, her voice firm. She was no longer asking for permission. She was giving orders. "He'll expect a sweep. We let the sniper get into position. We let Park think his plan is working." "That's an unacceptable risk." Min Jun's voice was like gravel. "It's the only way to catch Park himself," she countered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Your grandfather will wear a vest. At the exact moment he's supposed to begin his speech, I'll create a distraction, a fire alarm. In the confusion, I'll get him off the stage. Your men will take the sniper. But the real trap is for Park. She slid a financial report across the table. While everyone is focused on the assassination attempt, my algorithm will execute a series of trades. It will use Park's own leveraged funds to short his stock into oblivion. It will trigger margin calls he can't meet. By the time the fire alarm is silenced, he'll be ruined. We'll have him on trafficking, attempted murder, and financial collapse. A trifecta. He'll have nowhere left to run. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It balanced on a razor's edge. Minjun studied her, his eyes searching hers, seeing not a reckless amateur, but a fellow strategist, a grandmaster seeing the whole board. He had planned to use a sledgehammer. She was offering him a scalpel to cut out the cancer's heart. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. We do it your way. The night of the gala, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and ambition. Zola moved through the glittering crowd, not as a waitress or a cleaner, but as an invited guest. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the jewel-toned gowns of the other women. Minjun had provided it, but the quiet authority she wore was her own. She was a ghost in the machine, her presence unnoticed but essential. She saw Chairman Park across the room, holding court, his face flushed with champagne and arrogance. He caught her eye and gave a small, mocking smile, a silent acknowledgement of their war. He thought he was winning. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The moment came. Grandfather Quan, a regal, unyielding figure, approached the podium. Zola's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her hand hovered over the fire alarm trigger on her phone. She watched the catwalk high above, seeing the faint glint of a rifle scope. The old man reached the podium. He tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. Zola's finger pressed the screen. But before the alarm could blare, a small voice cut through the silence. It was Leo. He was standing near the stage with Mrs. Cho, and he was pointing, his small finger aimed not at the stage, but at the catwalk above. "Mama!" His voice was clear, childish, and loud. "The bad man is up there, like in my dream." Time stopped. Every head in the room, including Park's, snapped towards Leo, then followed his finger up to the catwalk. The sniper, exposed, froze in panic. Park's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The plan was blown. In that split second of chaos, Zola didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for security. She ran. She launched herself at the podium, tackling the elderly Quan patriarch with a force that sent them both tumbling to the floor behind the heavy oak structure. A fraction of a second later, the silenced crack of a rifle echoed through the ballroom, and a splinter of wood exploded from the front of the podium, exactly where the old man's heart had been. Minjun's men, their professionalism absolute, moved with lethal speed. They swarmed the catwalk, subduing the sniper. Others formed a protective circle around Zola and the elder Quan. But Zola's eyes were on Park. He was trying to flee, to slip away in the pandemonium. But Minjun was already moving, a shadow of vengeance, cutting off his escape. The trap had been sprung, not by a fire alarm, but by a child's dream. The result, however, was the same. Park was cornered. His empire was already hemorrhaging money. The algorithm Zola had unleashed now, doing its silent, devastating work. His assassin was captured. He was finished. Zola helped the old man to his feet. He looked at her, his ancient wise eyes seeing everything. He placed a hand on her arm. "You have the spirit of a dragon, child," he said, his voice firm. The fire had been averted. The war was over. All that was left was the final confrontation. The emergency board meeting of Viridian Trade was held in a room of cold glass and colder fear. The men and women around the polished mahogany table were the pillars of Park Jinwoo's empire, and they knew it was crumbling. Their faces were gray with the terror of financial ruin. At the head of the table, Park himself sat, a hollowed-out parody of his former arrogance. He was a king in a collapsing castle. The doors to the boardroom opened. Quan Minjun entered, his presence sucking the remaining air from the room. But he was not alone. Beside him walked Zola. She was not wearing a dress or a uniform. She wore a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray suit, her hair styled in an elegant upsweep. She moved with an unshakable, commanding grace. She was no longer a waitress, a cleaner, or even an analyst. She was power incarnate. She took a seat directly opposite Park at the other end of the long table. The confrontation reversal was complete. She was in the seat of judgment. Park stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You," he whispered, the sound a dry rasp. Zola looked at him, her expression calm, her gaze level. "Me," she confirmed, her voice carrying easily in the silent room. A nervous corporate lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Kwan, Ms. Amadi, this is a private meeting. We are discussing the catastrophic and unforeseen liquidation of our assets." "The liquidation was not unforeseen," Zola cut in, her voice slicing through his blustering. She turned her attention back to Park. She began to speak, her Korean as flawless and cold as it had been in the restaurant. She didn't use screens or present evidence. She didn't need to. She spoke from memory. "Anissa, from the Philippines. Age 19, sold to a private club in Gangnam for 30 million won. May, from Thailand, age 17. Her contract promised a culinary scholarship." She continued, listing names, ages, countries, and prices. She detailed the shipping containers they arrived in, the holding cells in the basement of the Grand Imperial Hotel, the secret bank accounts in Panama where he hid the profits. With every name, Park shrank further into his chair. The other board members stared, their faces masks of horror. They had profited from his success, willfully blind to its source. Now, the blinders were being ripped away. "You built an empire on the backs of stolen girls," Zola concluded, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "And you humiliated the wrong waitress," Park finally snapped. He lunged to his feet, his face purple with impotent rage. "I'll kill you. You're nothing. A poor black." He didn't get to finish the slur. Minjun's hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat, lifting him slightly off his feet. Minjun's eyes were black holes of cold fury. He said nothing, but the promise of violence was absolute. He held him for a moment longer, then threw him back into his chair. Park was broken. The fight was gone, replaced by a desperate, sniveling fear. He looked at Zola, his eyes pleading. "Please, I have money. I'll give you anything. Name your price." Zola regarded him for a long moment, a flicker of the burning pain on her arm, a distant memory. She leaned forward slightly. "You offered me a burn, Chairman Park," she said, her voice soft, her English precise. "I'm offering you ashes." That was when the doors opened again. This time, it was the authorities, not the local police, but the national prosecutors, the ones who couldn't be bought. They moved with grim efficiency, cuffing a whimpering Park, his board members scattering like rats. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle was already won. They were just the cleanup crew. 6 months later, the Zola Amadi Foundation occupied a sunlit office in a sleek glass tower that had once borne the Viridian trade logo. Zola stood before a whiteboard, commanding the attention of a room full of lawyers, social workers, and investigators. She was outlining a plan to extract a group of trafficked women from a shipyard in Incheon, her voice confident, her strategy precise. She was doing the job, not just wearing the title. In a corner of the office, on a soft rug, Leo sat drawing. He was healthy, his cheeks full, his laughter easy and frequent. The experimental treatment had worked wonders. He was sketching a picture with a yellow crayon, a fierce, magnificent dragon with kind eyes. The door opened and Kwan Minjun walked in. The room didn't fall silent this time. They merely nodded respectfully. He was a benefactor, an ally. But this was Zola's kingdom. His eyes found her, a quiet pride in his gaze that was more intimate than any touch. Leo looked up, his face breaking into a wide grin. He scrambled to his feet and ran to Minjun, hugging his legs. "It's you!" he shouted happily. Minjun looked down, a rare, almost imperceptible softness in his expression. He gently rested a hand on Leo's head. Zola walked over, a small, genuine smile on her face. "He still talks about his dream," she said quietly to Minjun. "Dream? Before all this," she explained, her voice low, "he was having nightmares, but one night he told me he had a new dream, that a big golden dragon came to our house to fight the monsters away. The day you came to the restaurant, that was the first time he saw you." She paused. "He said you were the man from his dream." Minjun looked from Leo's happy, upturned face to Zola's strong, serene one. He saw her not as an asset or a strategist, but as the fierce protector of this small, precious world she had built from the ashes of her enemy. The unspoken bond between them was a tangible thing, a quiet space of mutual respect and earned partnership. He looked at Leo's drawing of the golden dragon. "Some dragons hoard gold," Minjun said, his voice a quiet rumble meant only for her. "Others protect it." He looked back at her, and for the first time, a true small smile touched his lips. It was a smile that reached his cold eyes, warming them like a winter sunrise. It was recognition. It was belonging. It was everything. "What would you have done?"